Okay. I just got a raised hand. Anthony, did you want to ask your question? I will allow you to talk. Can you hear everything okay? Is that what the question's about? Anthony, you should be able to unmute and
Okay, there we go. No, that was me just trying to, I'm not, I just see you. I now see Anthony's,
okay.
but there are a lot of people on this call.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to, did you have a question or you're just trying?
No, it was just to say like, hey,
Okay.
um, so
Awesome.
you plow away.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So I hit record. So good afternoon. My name is Scott Christensen. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who joined us today for a presentation called Highlighting the Funding and Support Landscape for Ecology and Climate-Focused Ventures. This workshop is part of our ongoing Startup Fundamentals workshop series, which is offered by Ventures with collaboration from the Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute, as well as the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland. To everyone attending a live session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. You can submit your questions anonymously if you wish. This will also be recorded, then you can put you'll be able to rewatch this on our Startup UMD YouTube channel. And I'm actually the presenter, the facilitator, and the presenter. So in terms of a quick intro, my name again is Scott Christensen. I work at MTech, Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute, where I support MTech Ventures, which is an incubator for technology startups coming out of the University of Maryland. And I also work on a seed fund sponsored by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, focused on ventures that are addressing nutrient pollution and climate resilience in the Chesapeake Bay. We're focused on Maryland specifically because we get our funding from the state. But anyways, that's a quick bio or a quick intro. And I think we will just go ahead and get into the presentation. I will make a quick note. There will be lots of information, resources, dumped in. I know I can only see myself, so it doesn't feel that interactive, but it will be interactive. Feel free to raise your hand, send questions in the chat and I'll answer them. We won't wait till there will be time at the end to talk through Q&A, but we can also just do it right as it's, as I'm talking. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen. And then we're going to hit. Okay. I'm going to assume if I don't get any raised hands, you guys can see it okay. But so this is the presentation. The goal is to give an overview of the funding landscape, which will mostly be relevant for Maryland companies, as well as, some DMV regional resources, which will include both different funders, entrepreneur support resources. I'll try to leave you guys with some leads that you can then follow down for funding. And then at the end, I will kind of detail our fund specifically and what we do, right? Quick agenda. So I'm going to walk through kind of the capital raising process and what that looks like. Then we're going to go through an actual ecosystem map and then detail this Chesapeake Bay. Ask questions at any point. So capital raising, I'm going to keep it brief. This is kind of a framework that I've stolen from a attorney, Jenny Casson, who wrote a book that I pulled this almost directly from. And we're assuming that you're coming here because you're working on some ecology or climate focused venture. And maybe you may be thinking about it as a nonprofit. You may be thinking about it as a for-profit startup, a cooperative, etc. Many different things. The common thread is that you guys are working on some kind of climate or energy related enterprise. Also, I cannot really see questions very well, so it may end up having to be a end of the. I don't have a facilitator, so it might just be at the end. Any questions? But okay, so you're a venture. You're trying to do good stuff for climate, ecology, whatever it is, right? You're going to want to get clear on your goals and values. I have a slide on this, and then you're going to want to figure out who is potentially the right investor for you. And then you're going to think about what the terms of said investment would look like, figure out all the legal pieces, and then you're going to go ahead and raise that money and do what you want to do. So when you're thinking about the goals and values, you're going to want to first, I think many people, many entrepreneurs that I have interacted with in the past kind of skip this first section on goals and values, and they go straight into, raising a seed round, raising a pre-seed round, whatever it is, or just going to, foundations and writing grants and whatnot. They're not necessarily thinking about the long term. You see this more in the venture capital route of building a business. You just go straight to a seed round because there's a lot of programming and there's a lot of energy around the venture capital model of building businesses. And so I guess my point here is that it's really helpful to kind of think through what you actually want. What are your goals? What are your values? Why are you doing this? What is meaningful to you? And I'm going to go through what some examples of some values and some goals are. But the point is, you should really take some time to think about this. And I'll also share some entrepreneur support folks who can help you with that. But there's a myriad of stories of people who, get kicked out of their business long term because of their venture capital investors, or, just haven't necessarily thought about the governance of their business, and then bad things happen, right? So just being intentional upfront will save you a lot of time in the long term, a lot of heartache. Values, what do we mean by this? Broadly, how do you want your business to operate? Operate point blank, right? Like, how do you think about, your employees? How do you think about your suppliers? How do you think about, there's a whole, I don't want to read these off to you. And I'll send this deck afterwards as well. Goals, what do you want, right? I think this is just, a lot of this these assumptions go undiscussed with a lot of funders. And then it becomes a source of tension long term, and so I think the clearest lesson I have here is just communicate. Like, why are you doing this? What is happening? What do you want to happen, right? I think communication is key here, when you're thinking about the fundraising process. And then obviously this is where this is probably most helpful, is kind of thinking about who are the investors, what are the different support resources that you can use. I think when you're thinking about fundraising, we're obviously talking about a broad swath of strategies, a lot of different ways to raise money to do what you want to do. I think, as it kind of indicates on the slide, the core tension with a lot of these, especially in this kind of impact space, is this idea of the exit strategy. An investor gives you money. How are they going to get it back? Are you going to sell your business long term? Like, is that the plan? You're going to sell your business? Are you going to, pay some form of dividend back? Are you going to buy out your investors at a certain point? What is the plan long term? And you'll see kind of, I think in most economic development strategies that I've come across, the kind of underlying assumption is that you're going to sell the business at some point, which again that's where the goals and the values come into play. Because what do you want? Do you want to sell the business long term? Yeah. And so with that said, I think I'm going to call an audible, and I think I'm going to go to step 3 and 4 real quick, and then go into the ecosystem map. And so when you're thinking about this is more or less outside of the scope of this presentation. But just, I want you to at least know that there's a lot of options for how you take money into your business. Again, the traditional economic development approach that you'll most often hear about in traditional economic development is this kind of equity model, where you're trading a portion of ownership in your business for cash, right? But there's also traditional debt, which can be very hard for startup businesses to access. There's revenue-based debt, profit-based debt, convertible debt, agreements for future equity. There's a lot of nuance there. And so, again, this is kind of outside of the scope. It's just, there are options available. And I will also kind of in the ecosystem map detail like who you can kind of think about talking to on these different pieces. And again, there's one resource I would recommend, is the Raise Capital on Your Own Terms book. It's slightly, geared towards crowdfunding as an option, but not necessarily just crowdfunding. Like it's you can use those lessons for more or less any type of capital raising. And then there's my point with this slide is that there are a lot of already existing resources available out there to figure out how to do this. And so these are just some of the folks that you can, point to and learn from. So with that said, I'm going to go into the meat and why you guys ultimately came. Pull up the. Does anyone have any questions? I can see everyone now. Does anyone have any questions while I get this pulled up? Yes, I'll share the deck. Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to share the ecosystem map. And what I'll do is I'm going to put this link in the chat right here. So you guys can access it while we're talking through it. Yeah. So this is kind of a resource that I developed in partnership with Lindsay Ryan at the USM's system as part of what we're calling the Climate Innovation Alliance, which if you're not part of already, you should be. It is just a group of, the different people working on climate, more broadly in Maryland, and as well as just the broader DMV region. So I just put the link in the chat to that. I would recommend getting on their listserv. So here's the ecosystem map. It's a little bit discombobulating, but I think that's because of the nature of this. It's very hard to find the resources. A lot of economic development professionals around Maryland have put together various resources. You've likely seen like in Baltimore, there's the Be More Tech Connect. There's the Maryland Entrepreneur Hub. There's various different resources kind of intended to help people suss through all the resources and funding and all these different opportunities available. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do, just because there is so much nuance inherent in every single fund, different organization has a slightly different mandate, has different, some funding sources are only available to 5 people at 5 universities in, Maryland, and some are available to all of them. Some have no UMD, university affiliation. Some are focused on manufacturing. Like it's very hard to do well. So this is an effort that's largely focused on, climate focused ventures in Maryland. And I see some questions coming in. Oh, apologies. I could have sworn I put the link in the chat. Here's the ecosystem map. Oh, you know what I did? I sent it only to hosts and panelists, and that will do it. I thank you guys for your patience here. So that is the ecosystem map. And then this is the earlier link I sent around the Climate Innovation Alliance. So there's that. So now I should be able to actually send you guys chats. Okay. So you're a climate entrepreneur in Maryland. We're going to start with entrepreneur support orgs and programs. Luckily in Maryland, there are a lot of resources. We'll first talk about the customer discovery resources, which are all about kind of early stage entrepreneurs. How do you figure out how do you build a revenue model? How do you build a business model? How do you kind of suss out how are you going to make money? Customer discovery is largely, a resource around finding that first customer, finding your beachhead market. And so these are a couple different programs that you'll want to look into. For most people, I would recommend the UMD Mid-Atlantic I-Corps. That is a group that is available to all entrepreneurs, no matter where you are, and it's free. So I would definitely check that one out. In terms of incubators, you've got a plethora of incubators. They're largely going to be location-based. So yeah, I mean, this is again a hard one to really get. I'm happy to take conversations after this to kind of help, like handhold people through the process of finding the right resources for them. But again, a lot of them are location based, in terms of green groups and green incubators, you'll want to take a look at Bethesda Green, based in Bethesda, but they work with businesses all over the DMV region. You also want to check out F3 Tech if you have an ag-based innovation. They're out on the Eastern Shore and they have a lot of relationships with ag-focused, ag in the ag ecosystem. If you're thinking specifically about a cooperative model, a couple resources I would recommend are Start Co-op. Start.coop is kind of this national accelerator that they have a lot of resources available for the cooperative business model. How do you think about the legal aspects of building a cooperative? How do you, they have a lot of like the free templates and stuff for that. If you're in Silver Spring, Impact Silver Spring is a great group. Two affiliated groups in Baltimore and DC that are around worker cooperatives are Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy and the Beloved Community Incubator. More regionally, there's the Keystone Development Center, and they have a good event happening that I want to highlight. They are doing a series of sessions. I think it's every 2 weeks on weekdays at 11, just about different aspects of the cooperative business model. How do you think about funding? How do you think about legal? How do you think governance, etc.? That's completely free. In terms of getting to know other folks in the space, there is a group in Baltimore called the Baltimore Climate Tech Meetups. That's a good group. Just if you're, in this area and want to meet other people working in climate, that's a good one. If you're thinking, in Baltimore, the group Upsurge also has, good, they do an Equitech Tuesday every single Tuesday. It's just a space for entrepreneurs to meet one another. In DC, there's a group called Climate DC that you might want to pay attention to. They do a lot of happy hours and whatnot. Okay, so entrepreneur support. I think these are the folks that are going to help you, more in depth, more handhold you through that capital raising kind of aspect. I'm actually affiliated with this group at UMD called MTech Ventures. I'm more than happy to kind of, chat with you, make introductions where it's appropriate. Okay, so we're thinking about funding, right? There's several different boxes of funding. I'm going to start with some of the educational resources that should kind of underpin a capital raising strategy. And let me see, I have a question. Does Mid-Atlantic I-Corps offer funds for customer discovery and prototyping like the more university connected I-Corps programs? So Mid-Atlantic I-Corps it's housed at the University of Maryland. The regional program does not offer funds, but the university-based, the national I-Corps program also housed at UMD offers $50K, but that is focused on university-based research. And so I'm happy to, if you have questions about that, I would recommend reaching out to, his name's David Steele. I think you guys can. If you have questions about, that's not the right David Steele. Where is his email? This is the guy you're going to want to meet. He can answer your questions on, he can answer your questions about eligibility and funding options available for I-Corps. That is his email right there. So in terms of educational resources for financing and capital raising, these are some of the groups that are helpful. There's an Innovative Finance Playbook is a resource that kind of details the different types of funding instruments, whether it's traditional. I don't actually think they touch on traditional equity because there's so many resources available on that, but they, you can read about revenue share agreements, profit share agreements, all kinds of different financing instruments. And they have case studies and different things that can show you, how other companies have used it in the past with success. Transform Finance, another, kind of like I would say it's a little bit more for finance, like funders, geared towards funders, but it's also helpful just kind of, if you have the time, reading through some of their materials, pretty good. The book, Raise Your Capital on Your Own Terms, is very much like a kind of, one of the resources I'd recommend the most, right? It's just a book that goes through the process to raise capital, right? With it, again, it's a little bit focused on crowdfunding, but I think the wisdom works more broadly. This group, New Economy Coalition, has a really good funding library that is easily filterable for, you can kind of filter out what type of funding you're looking for, and your region and the type of work you're doing, whether it's sustainability or it's workforce development, whatever it is. That's a good resource to highlight. Sorry, I'm talking, I need some water. If you're in Baltimore, there's a group called the Community Wealth Builders that does kind of local crowdfunding that I would recommend. And they do a lot of work around the education and like how do you think about that? Okay, early stage funding resources. One of the quickest ones is this group Shore Hatchery. They do a pretty good competition. It's for entrepreneurs all over, and they do basically they award 200K in this competition. I believe it's coming up relatively soon. That's unfortunate. The application just closed. But that's a good group just to keep an eye out. Because they do it twice a year. So BG&E does a good program for small businesses. In Baltimore, there's a group, Ignite Capital, that does a lot of this kind of innovative financing, revenue notes, whatever it is. TEDCO, I'm sure most of you are familiar with TEDCO. They're kind of the economic development agency in Maryland that does a lot of the funding. A lot of it is venture capital funding, but they have a group, a fund called the Social Impact Fund that, again, it's hard to get into too much detail, but they can kind of, the guy you want to talk to there is a guy named Jean-Luc Park. He can kind of share a lot more, and a lot of this is online, so you can kind of read through the website and see what it makes sense for. It's largely going to be tech-based ventures, which is not necessarily going to be a fit for some of the ecology focused work that we're obviously talking about in this call. If you are an entrepreneur with an affiliation to a USM institution, whether it's alumni, student, faculty, you might want to consider the Maryland Launch Fund, which is kind of a group that Lindsay Ryan has put together around early stage initial capital, kind of recognizing that like a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that, in a lot of economic development programming, there's just kind of this assumption that people are going to go to their network to raise their initial capital. And that's, of course, not a possibility for a lot of entrepreneurs. And so this is kind of an effort at the USM level to fill that need. And so that's a good resource. I think the application is, it's not currently open, but it is launching soon, I believe. And then if you are a entrepreneur at either UMD, Morgan State, UMBC, UMD Baltimore, or Johns Hopkins, the Maryland Innovation Initiative is for you. It's just a kind of, again, this early stage funding for university-based innovations. So if you're thinking about forming as a worker cooperative, again, were also mentioned in the incubator section. And sorry, I know I'm talking through a lot, so definitely put the questions in the chat, and definitely feel free to reach out to me afterwards, because this is a difficult thing to kind of find the right resources. And I know I'm probably using some acronyms that I probably shouldn't, but I'm trying to do it quickly. And so these two groups in DC and Baltimore are both affiliated with a group called Seed Commons, which is a nationwide focused seed fund, focused on non-extractive finance, meaning how to, a lot of venture capital investors are trying to put money into businesses to make a ridiculous amount of money, which it has a lot of knock-on negative impacts on founders, whether it's pressure to grow super fast when maybe you don't need to, or it's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of stories about the issues with venture capital. And so Seed Commons is a attempt to kind of build a new model of finance called non-extractive finance, Basically they do what they call like a profit share agreement, which is they'll, fund a business with the expectation that the loan will be paid back from profits over time, rather than like a traditional debt where you're paying back every month regardless of whether or not it's good for the business, right? So this is kind of an attempt to really support businesses. And in venture capital, they always say 90% of venture capital funded businesses fail. And it's my opinion that a lot of that failures come from these crazy growth expectations, right? Whereas if you actually worked with the entrepreneur to plan long term and were more flexible in your funding model, I think we'd see a lot more success. So those are two groups I would recommend. At the national level, there's a group called Local Enterprise Assistance, which is focused on worker cooperatives, housing co-ops, other cooperative-based groups. And I believe they do more at term loans, but they're relatively low interest term loans. There's a group that often works with these other groups called Rokedale Capital. They're based in DC, but they do national. Shared Capital Cooperative, again, these will be slightly less helpful for startups. If you're a startup, I would definitely, I guess a quick note on worker cooperatives, like you're not going to want to start a worker cooperative unless you have 3 or more people. So a lot of individual entrepreneurs, it's not going to be the right fit for you right now. Sorry, let me just check questions. There we go. So then we have a quick little thing on venture investment. We did not go too in depth on venture capital investment more broadly because there's already a lot of resources available for that. That said, if you're thinking about venture investment in Maryland, you're going to want to think about TEDCO. Definitely, TEDCO does an open investment forum every month that you're going to want to attend just to kind of get a lay of the land and build some of the relationships with those folks. There's also a regional group called the Dingman Angels, which is a group of high net worth investors that meets on a monthly basis. And then they have, 4 companies pitching. And then they invest on an individual basis. So that's a great way to meet folks. And then there's also the USM Momentum Fund, which is all about USM entrepreneurs. Again, it could be alumni, faculty, alumni, faculty, current students. That's going to be a venture capital resource for them. They do investments of anywhere from, I think, 150 to 250K in partnership with other venture capital investors. And then specifically in climate and energy funders, you're going to want to talk about the Chesapeake Bay Capital Fund, which we'll do that shortly after this. There is if you have an energy-based innovation, I would highly recommend you get in touch with the folks at the Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator. They have a lot of programming focused on energy innovations, and they also have a large amount of funding available for that. This is another clean energy focused group. So MIA, the group I just mentioned, Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator, is a subunit of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. And so this is the Climate Catalytic Fund is a new initiative just passed in the legislature maybe a year ago. And you can kind of go into their eligibility and investment criteria, on their website. The chief thing here is they're focused on energy. So whether it's solar or it's, energy innovation, that's going to be your folks to talk to there. The Kaplan Fund is a regional, it's a national group that has a 150K grant due relatively soon, April 25th. You're going to want to, there's a link to the chat there. Again, that's another resource. Raise Green and Honeycomb, that is a crowdfunding service for climate focused entrepreneurs. They are going to charge, a fee. I actually don't know the fee off the top of my head, but I think most crowdfunders, it's somewhere from 5 to 7% of the funding you ultimately raise will be paid to that crowdfunder. I forget what that crowdfunding organization. So that's who you're going to want to talk to. Resilient Earth Capital is another angel group that's specifically focused on climate companies. So that's a good one. One of the guys involved with that, Justin Brody Comet, is involved with the Baltimore Climate Tech meetups. Is also in, so if you go to the Baltimore Climate Tech meetups, you'll likely meet Justin there. The Maryland Energy Innovation has another. If you have an energy innovation, you should definitely be in touch with people from the Maryland Energy Administration and the Maryland Clean Energy Center. If you're in energy, you're focused on energy and you don't already know those folks, let me know and I'm happy to kind of think about who you should talk to. Okay, so we're almost done. It's 12:33. R&D funding. So there is an initiative run out of TEDCO for, I think R&D funding you can kind of think of more broadly as this kind of non-dilutive. They're not taking equity. It's largely funding to go do something cool. I mean, I don't want to say it like that. Some kind of novel innovation. So there's a lot of resources available for that at the federal level. The federal government runs a program called the SBIR and the STTR. The SBIR stands for Small Business Innovative Research. And they run these programs out of the different agencies, whether it's DOE or it's Department of Defense or it's whatever agency. They run these programs where essentially you can get, the first phase one is usually something like 150K. And then if that goes well, you can apply for a phase two, which can be up to $1 million. And that is very good capital to get. And so TEDCO runs a program all about how to prepare for those applications. I think their most recent one, they just did one. So I don't know when the next one will be. But that's a good resource to be aware of. And they also, the National Science Foundation has a website where you can essentially just basically the way these SBIRs work is that they have the different agencies put out solicitations for specific, areas that they're looking for these projects on. And the NSF does a really cool thing where they just say, give us something you already are doing and we'll let you know if it's of interest. So I will send that link in a follow-up email, but that's a cool initiative. In Maryland, there's a group called MIPS. I would highly recommend getting to know the MIPS folks. It's basically a program to develop a project in tandem with a USM researcher. And basically the way it works is for a startup. And they have, defined startup, like I think it's less than, I forget the exact number, but it's probably something like less than 20 employees. If you have less than 20 employees, you can pay 10% of the project cost and get 90% matched. And so that's a great way, if you're trying to develop a biochar production process, or you're, trying to integrate, some new technology into your service, that could be a great program for you. They also help you kind of find a researcher that can help you with that project or that would be interested in working with you. That funding then goes to the actual lab. And so it doesn't go to the company, it goes to the lab and then they execute on that project. And then they work out a agreement with the company so that the company can use the product. So would recommend getting to know that one. These are two manufacturing focused grant programs. I'm not going to go into detail on those ones. So that's basically it on the funding side. Just quick note, I mean, every county in Maryland has a small business development center that will be of help with a lot of this kind of stuff. There's also a group that will help with kind of legal questions on a pro bono basis that you should be aware of. Yes, and then this is just a quick note, I work at a university, and so we have a lot of programs for, how do you work with students to do a capstone project? If you have an engineering based innovation, you can likely work with a team at UMD to get you work with a student group on their capstone, right? You can develop a project for them, and then, it's kind of a win-win for both parties because they get a cool project to do and you get some free work. Of course, it's, you got to be realistic with your expectations, but it can be a very cool thing. We also have, there's MBA students are always looking for capstones. And so there's a cool group called the Impact Consulting Fellowship, which offers kind of free consulting work for companies. Maryland Technology Internship Program is a program that sponsors interns for Maryland-based companies. It's a good resource. In terms of finding mentors, Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator has a program helping you find EIRs. Same thing with TEDCO has a network advisors program. There's a lot there, and my throat honestly is starting to hurt. So I think that's probably about it. I have some more links that I want to share. There is another program that we did not include on this list called Exelon 2C2I. They will be opening their applications in the summer. I think I already shared this, but I'm going to share it just in case. The New Economy Coalition has a funding library that, all kinds of different funding resources. It's a little bit tedious to go through them, but it can be worthwhile. And then the last thing I will mention is that one of the things I'm working on at the Chesapeake Bay Seed Capital Fund is doing kind of like a roundtable every month to kind of, one of the things I've realized working in this role is that a lot of the climate entrepreneurs don't know each other. And there's actually, there's so many ways to collaborate and they don't even know each other. And so we're kind of doing this call once a month, just so folks can meet each other and find ways to collaborate. And also, I'm also thinking about how do we get students, I get students all the time that are looking for internships, and, you have researchers that are looking for collaborations, and you have funders who are looking for fundable projects, right? So that's that. Highly recommend joining that. I think the last thing, I'm going to go through the Chesapeake Bay Seed Capital Fund really quick. Can you guys see my screen? I hope you can. We got another. Okay, so quick question. Isn't MIPS a flat 10K cost to the startup, or do they offer other sizes of research? So the reason I said the 10% is because they also they'll do programs with corporates where they'll pay, like, the corporates will pay like 50% of the total grant costs, right? So there's some different stipulations based on the size of the company. But it's broadly startups pay 10% of the total project cost. And that can be, the projects can be up to 150K. So if it's a 150K project, my understanding is that then the startup would pay 15K. But I'm not intimately involved with that program, so Ronnie Gist would be the person to talk to on that one. Okay, it's 12:41. I'm gonna fly through this one. Chesapeake Bay Seed Capital Fund. It is basically a seed fund sponsored by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources to really address non-point source pollution. So the way I kind of think about non-point sources pollution versus point source is if you can point to a source of pollution, we can't fund that. There are other programs for that, but you're thinking about like wastewater systems or factories. Generally, we're looking at funding non-point source things. So, algal turf scrubbers or bioreactor gardens focused on septic systems, which sounds like a point source, but it's not. We could go into that if you want. But so essentially, yes. So that's what our fund does. The objectives are just to kind of, how do we get these things going? How do we support the development of the crucial work that is nutrient pollution and climate resilience. I think a lot of people get confused by the technology piece. I've kind of taken the approach that, like, technology is a rather expansive, like, is it nature technology? That's kind of how I think about it, right? So I'm not necessarily like, I don't think we need to have like a piece of hardware. It just needs to be, addressing that nutrient pollution issue. And it is, just to be clear, this is not a grant program. This is a investment program. It's historically been a venture capital program, but what I'm kind of thinking about is how do we change that and how do we adopt a practice like seed commons, right? And kind of work with the company to figure out what is the best funding instrument for them. Yes, so we get 500K each year to do this. Not going to go in depth on that. Basically, the way we run the program is we do an expert panel, and then we do 2 meetings. We do an expert panel to kind of suss out, is this a sound environmental impact? Is this technically sound, et cetera? And then we do an advisory board meeting, which is just, we've essentially done all the legwork. We've figured out the investment terms, and it's just a sign off from the University of Maryland CFO. And so this is just kind of broad investment criteria. We're looking to support Maryland-based companies, non-point source. I've kind of added, have a robust capital raising plan. I missed a L on capital. And just kind of yeah, so this is the investment criteria. I'm more than happy to work with companies to kind of develop this sort of thing. To develop a good capital raising plan and to develop a good reasonable application. This is kind of the process that I just described, initial review, expert panel, advisory board process, and then we fund, right? So expert panel, advisory board, and then Q&A. And then this is just my contact information. So with that said, I'll send out this deck afterwards. So that is it. I apologize. I know it was very stream of consciousness, I would say. But yeah, so how did I mute myself? Thank you, Anand. I don't know how that happened, but apologies. I was just saying, someone asked about the Dingman Center, how to get in touch with the Dingman Center Angels group. And there's more information on this link. And yeah. Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Save the chat. I mean, a lot of the chat, I'll send out an email with this kind of information that's included in the chat. So yes. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? There's a lot to unpack. Thank you for this event. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of why we do it, is because there's so much information out there. It's hard to suss through. And so again, I'm happy to have a conversation. I mean, it's just a lot to kind of find all this information and make it make sense. It's not necessarily presented in a concise way, right? Like all these things are very everyone has different incentives and different objectives and different, it's just difficult to find where you fit. And so I feel like we should be making it easier. So that's why I'm trying to do this. Well, if we have no more questions, then I won't keep you guys. But I'll stay on till 1 if anyone has any questions, but otherwise feel free to jump off. Okay, we got 8 people still on the call, so if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'll be here. Is participation in any of the programs mentioned make a company ineligible for other funds and resources? Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so. I mean, you see lots of companies do 6 incubators and accelerators. It's definitely possible. And yeah, I don't think there's any, exclusionary practices or anything. So is there a way to have people review what you're doing and see who might be tweaked to address a problem we didn't see or understand? So Anthony, I think you might want, that's kind of where I see like the role of like an incubator or accelerator. So like a Conscious Venture Labs or a Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy or a F3 Tech. There's all these different groups that are focused on kind of supporting entrepreneurs through those questions. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the key thing. I mean, you might check out a group like the Maryland, I know it's Maryland Energy Innovation. Oh, so I see Peter. Yeah, I mean, that's the role of these different incubators and accelerators. You guys might, and the Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator has energy in the name, but they actually do support climate focused innovations more broadly. So that might be a good resource for you guys to look into. So, and also, I mean, I think you guys did I-Core, right? Like that's kind of the focus, is like focusing the hypothesis. That's what they're there to do. You can do I-Core multiple times if you need to. Okay. Sounds good. Well, I think I'm gonna close it down. So sounds good. Have a good one.